Hi there, happy hump day. It must be Wednesday. Today, we're talking all about negotiating. Now, when you think about a negotiation, people often think that it's all about getting to yes. And in fact, there is a very famous book on negotiations which was written with that title, and it's worth reading. But you actually need to hear a no, and you often need to say a no as part of the negotiation process. I remember many years ago reading an article where they were talking about negotiation tactics, and what this writer was suggesting that what you needed to do was get a series of yes statements. Because when you got a series of yes statements, that would ultimately then lead to the person agreeing to whatever your ultimate goal was. The challenge with all of this is it does imply that hearing a no or saying a no isn't important, that it's a bad thing. But actually, the no is an important part of the negotiation process. It helps to outline the boundaries. It helps you understand what you're willing to give up or not give up, and also the same for the person that you're negotiating with. And most importantly, it can be incredibly empowering, because when you're saying no, you're standing in your conviction and you're saying, this is what matters to me, or this is what doesn't matter to me. The acclaimed author Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, said, when you're saying yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself. We've all got the right to say what we want and what we don't want to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't say no without careful consideration and you're not doing it in a way that is compassionate or considering the needs of others, but it does mean that you're standing up for yourself. And there's no doubt sometimes it can feel hard to say no, and often it's just far easier to say yes, to get it over and done with, and to agree to things that you don't want to do. If you think about it, it's a bit like the Pester Power of children. When a child wants something and then what they're going to do is just go at you, until eventually you cave in. And you're caving in because it's easier. It's not ultimately what you think needs to be done. So with adults, often it's the same. We can say yes to things often reluctantly because then it's easier to do that than to explain to why we don't want to do something, because perhaps we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or we just don't have the time to get into the conversation, and so we agree. And yet when you do that, the problem is you're agreeing to something that you don't want to do. And if you keep doing it, eventually you're going to wake up one day and find your life filled with a whole raft of things that aren't important to you and don't help you live the life that you want to live. So when you're thinking about what you want to say yes to, you do need to think about what you want to say no to at the same time. And when you say a no, you need to do that no with conviction and with compassion. So here's a couple of things for you to think about when you're saying your no. Firstly, check the real reason for saying no and make sure it's a legitimate reason and that you're not just being obstructionist and difficult to either work with or live with. Secondly, stand in your conviction. Back yourself. There's a reason why you want to say no, and that reason is likely to be valid. And so it does mean that when you're delivering the no, you're doing it with compassion and you're demonstrating your understanding for the other person's perspective. Thirdly, be clear on the reason for saying no and be prepared to explain why you want to say no. So don't just say no. Say no and explain the reason for that so that they understand where you're coming from. And fourthly, be genuine in your response and make sure you're open to hearing the other person's perspective when you say no. They might be disappointed. They might want to counter with something else. So be open to that. But that doesn't mean that you have to then eventually capitulate and say yes. There are times when saying no is a really important part of a negotiation process, but also for you in terms of building healthy relationships with people around you. Take care, and I'll see you next week.